this morning's plenary is Alan Robock, Distinguished Professor of Climate Science at Rutgers University, a world leader in the modeling of the Earth's climate and the source of much of our best understanding of the danger of nuclear winter. Alan, the floor is yours. You're muted. You're still muted. There we go.
Yeah, you just allowed me to unmute, but I can't share my screen. So could you allow me to do that too?
Okay, try that, Alan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to talk about the threat of nuclear winter. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just see the presentation. Okay. I just like to start out to acknowledge that I'm from Rutgers University, and the namesake Colonel Henry Rutgers owned slaves, as did many of the early presidents of Rutgers University, and slave labor built the Rutgers campus, and the land was stolen from the Lenni Lenape natives, and we're part of the Land Grant Moral Act, but that means that land was taken from Western Native Americans for the benefit of Rutgers. But we have a committee on enslaved and disenfranchised populations, and we're trying to make up for that now. This is the beautiful world that we know and love, but after a nuclear war, it might look like this, with clouds of smoke covering the planet, blocking out sun, and making it cold and dark at the Earth's surface. If it got dark enough, we would have what's called a nuclear winter, which means that the temperatures would be below freezing and crops would die. And now this is a graph of the total number of nuclear weapons that we have on the planet. And you'll see that there was a nuclear arms race that ended in the 1980s. Why? Well, there was a paper by Crutzen and Burks pointing out that there might be smoke and fires from a nuclear war. And then a Russian group and an American group calculated that the temperatures would get below freezing and it would produce nuclear winter. And then I published a paper too. And then the nuclear arms race ended. And the Soviet Union ended 5 years later, so that's not why it ended. And I just point out that the number of deployed nuclear weapons is still not zero. This was why, excuse me?
I'm glad you called me because you're up in about 15.
So now why do I think that scientists helped to end the arms race? Well, we just asked the people that did it. Ronald Reagan said a great many reputable scientists told us about nuclear winter. And Mikhail Gorbachev said models made by Russian American scientists showed a nuclear war would result in nuclear winter. And so they actually listened to scientists from both sides. And what would happen if there was a nuclear bomb? This is the first atomic bomb test at Trinity site in New Mexico. And when Robert Oppenheimer, who invented the bomb, said, "I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds." Now, we used to test these bombs in the atmosphere, and this is the upshot knothole test on the Nevada desert. And it's like bringing a piece of the earth, of the sun to the earth for a fraction of a second, and everything within a certain distance will burst into flames and produce smoke. And they had a house they built to see what would happen, and it's lit by the blast, and then it begins to burn, and then the blast wave hits, blowing it apart, and you might think it might blow out the
You're muted, Alan.
How about now? Is that okay?
Perfect.
And so during the first nuclear war, the United States dropped a 15 kiloton bomb on Hiroshima, which killed about 150,000 people. And that's a pretty small bomb by today's standards. It's 15,000 tons of TNT. But we have so many weapons today that if you dropped one Hiroshima bomb every 2 hours since then for 75 years, you still wouldn't use up the explosive power of today's nuclear weapons. This is the airplane that did it, the Enola Gay. This is back when it was in pieces at the Air and Space Museum, and this is the black thing is a model of the bomb. And these are photos taken. The one on the left is the actual mushroom cloud, and the one on the right is the pyrocumulonimbus, the smoke plume from the fire that was started by the bombs, pumping smoke up into the atmosphere. This is a picture of drawn by one of the survivors, and what they remember is the smoke. This is what Hiroshima looked like afterwards. All the buildings burned. 3 days later, we dropped a bomb called Fat Man on Nagasaki. It was a plutonium bomb. And here's a picture I took in the museum there of Fat Man and the bomb. And this is what the mushroom cloud looked like there. And Nagasaki also, everything over that area burned. Now, unfortunately, we have examples of cities burning. In 1906, after the earthquake in San Francisco, there was a terrible fire there. And Jack London wrote about it. He said, I watched the vast conflagration from out on the bay. It was dead calm, not a flicker of wind stirred, yet air from every side wind was pouring in upon the doomed city. The heated air rising made an enormous suck. Thus did the fire of itself build its own colossal chimney through the atmosphere. And this is what San Francisco looked like afterwards. We've had examples recently of forest fires, such as in Australia a year ago, that pumped smoke into the stratosphere. The first calculation in the US was by the TAPS group, Turco, Toon, Ackerman, Pollock, and Sagan, and gave the name nuclear winter. And then Alexandrov and Stenchikov in Russia at the same time calculated the distribution of the climate change and also got nuclear winter. And I published a paper in Nature about it. And we're still doing research on it, supported by the Open Philanthropy Project. A year ago at the American Geophysical Union meeting, this is a picture of some of us, Turco, Toon, Ackerman, me, and Stenchikov. So there's about 13,000 nuclear weapons now. This is a picture done by the Nagasaki University. And almost all of them are the US and Russia. The little wedges here are the 7 other countries that have nuclear weapons, but the US and Russia each have about 6,000. And fortunately, the new Biden and Putin have agreed to extend the New START treaty for another 5 years, which limits the number of deployed nuclear weapons. But why do we have so many? All the other countries that have them only have a couple hundred. Why do the US and Russia have thousands? So because there are these new nuclear countries, we decided to calculate how would a couple of the new nuclear countries, what if they had a nuclear war? So we said, what if India and Pakistan had a nuclear war? They're always having skirmishes along the Kashmiri border. And this is just a movie I made from one of our simulations showing the smoke lofted up into the upper atmosphere and being blown around the world. When you calculate the climate change, I plotted this on the graph of the global warming that I spent a lot of time working on, and it would be instant climate change. Temperatures would cool, it wouldn't be nuclear winter, but temperatures would cool so cold that it would be climate change unprecedented in recorded human history. Other models have done the simulation too. Here's one done at the National Center for Atmospheric Research with better graphics, and he showed how the smoke would get up into the stratosphere and last for years. The smoke is black and heated by the sun and lofted, and it would be spread around the world and last for a long time. But that's only 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons. It turns out that there's many more. The US has 14 tridents, and our nuclear weapons are typically 100 or 500 kilotons, not 15. And we have 14, and that's less than half of our arsenal, and the Russia has the same. So we really have like 50,000 Hiroshimas, not 100 Hiroshimas in the arsenal. So we decided to calculate using modern climate models what would happen if the US and Russia had a full-scale nuclear war. And that would produce about 150 million tons of smoke, not the 5 million tons in India, Pakistan case. And so here's a movie I made of that. It would be just much thicker smoke. And then we calculated how the temperature would change. A year later, this is the change of temperature in the Northern Hemisphere summer. Anything that's purple is more than 30 degrees Celsius, 50 Fahrenheit degrees colder than normal. So this is in the summertime. And let's take a place where agriculture takes place, such as in the Ukraine, this red dot. And we plotted a graph of how what the surface minimum temperature would be. And if the war began on May 15th, the red line, temperatures would quickly get below freezing and stay below freezing for a couple years. So nuclear winter really is true. The theory is true even with modern climate models. So we looked at different amounts of smoke put in the atmosphere, 5 million tons, 5 teragrams from India, Pakistan, 50 or 150, and clearly temperatures would get below, would cool very fast. The global average temperature was about 5 degrees colder 20,000 years ago during the last great ice age, with ice sheets covering the continents. If I plot this on the graph of global warming since 1880, I had to rescale it in temperatures. It looks like this. And if I plot it on the hockey stick diagram for the last 1,000 years, it looks like this. So what does that mean? Temperatures get very cold. How would that affect us? We decided to look at how it would affect our food. So if you just look at land, and we did simulations for various possible cases just for India, Pakistan, from 5 to 50 teragrams, and the temperatures would get to 2 to 10 degrees below freezing below normal for about 5 years. And so for the 5 teragram case, we calculated with a bunch of crop models, how would corn production change? And it would go down by about 15% globally, and at higher latitudes, quite a bit, and for quite a bit more. And for, say, 15 teragrams, huge areas wouldn't be able to grow any corn at all. And the global average change would be 34%. And this would be the same for, similar for other crops, soybean, wheat, and rice. And then we also looked at including the nuclear winter case, which is the yellow line here, how corn, rice, soybean, and wheat would change. And it would basically destroy all our agricultural production for a number of years. So the conclusions are a nuclear war between any nuclear states using much less than 1% of the current nuclear arsenal, which is India, Pakistan, would produce climate change unprecedented in human history. And such a small nuclear war would reduce food production by 10 to 40% for a decade. The nuclear winter theory is correct. The current arsenal can still produce nuclear winter, producing global famine, and the effects would last for more than a decade. So as Jonathan mentioned, we now have a treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons. It was finalized 3 years ago at the UN, partly based on our work, and it was ratified on October 24th last year, and yesterday it came into force. There's now 52 countries that have ratified it. But the P5, the 5 countries with the permanent members of the Security Council, the first 5 countries to get nuclear weapons, are trying to ignore it. But the rest of the world is not. And the Nobel Peace Prize was given to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons in 2017. And when Beatrice Finn accepted it, she said, if only a small fraction of today's nuclear weapons were used, soot and smoke from firestorms would loft high in the atmosphere, cooling, darkening, and drying the earth for more than a decade. It would obliterate food crops, putting billions at risk of starvation. Yet we continue to live in denial of this existential threat. The story of nuclear weapons will have an ending, and it's up to us what that ending will be. Will it be the end of nuclear weapons, or will it be the end of us? One of these things will happen. The only rational course of action is to cease living under the conditions where our mutual destruction is only one impulsive tantrum away. So nuclear weapons can be used if they exist, and we've been really lucky for the last 75 years not to have had another nuclear war. It could be started by accident, by hackers, by computer failure, by bad sensors, unstable leaders. Fortunately, we have one less unstable leader now. Nuclear arsenals do not deter attacks from non-nuclear states, from terrorists, or pandemics. And the only way deterrence could work is if the states believe that we're willing to kill ourselves by using our nuclear weapons, because if we use them against another state, we'd all starve to death. So, and it also has to work permanently forever. So the only way really to prevent a global catastrophe is to get rid of the nuclear weapons. Now, if the US and Russia reduce their arsenals to the same size as the other states, we wouldn't have nuclear winter, but we have to actually abolish the nuclear weapons in order to prevent nuclear famine. So I hope we can continue to live with a beautiful planet like this for a long time to come. And if you want more information, here's my website. Thanks very much.